The dress wasn't mine. It shimmered in ivory silence, hanging against the window of the old Ashford estate like a promise made to someone else. Silk buttons, hand-stitched lace, the kind of craftsmanship that whispered wealth without needing to shout. It didn't belong to me, but here I was, stepping into it as if it did. "I had it tailored for Charlotte," my mother said, voice flat, cool as marble. "But you'll wear it just fine." She stood behind me, hands on her hips, her pearl necklace catching the early Savannah light. My reflection in the mirror showed a stranger. The tight bun, the borrowed makeup, the gown meant for a daughter who had disappeared just 4 days before her wedding. Charlotte, the chosen one. Beautiful, poised, ambitious. She had always belonged to this world of Southern debuts and trust fund negotiations. She was the woman meant to marry Grayson Lowell, the brilliant tech magnate now lying unconscious in a private recovery suite just across town. I was Caroline, the second daughter, the quiet one who painted in corners and studied art therapy instead of corporate strategy. The one who'd been told too many times to be grateful that her family name opened any door at all, but this door led to something else entirely. "You're marrying a man in a coma," I said quietly, more to myself than to her. "You're securing our future," she corrected. "Don't be dramatic." My lips parted, but no sound came. What was there to say? That I'd spent the last 2 weeks responding to Grayson's board members as if I were Charlotte. That I'd memorized my sister's cadence, her perfume, the curve of her signature, all for this illusion. That a family like ours, old money, dwindling assets, would do anything to maintain the image? A soft knock tapped at the dressing room door. It creaked open, and Etta peeked in, her apron slightly wrinkled from the morning bustle. "They're ready in the chapel," she said, eyes flicking to me for a beat longer than necessary. "Caroline." "Charlotte," my mother cut in sharply. "She's Charlotte today." Etta nodded slowly, lips pressed together, then slipped back out. I wanted to run after her, to tell her I hadn't asked for this, but my feet were numb. Mother stepped closer and fastened a diamond bracelet around my wrist. "Remember," she said almost gently, "Grayson's recovery is uncertain. This is temporary. You just need to hold the name for a while, until things settle." "What if he wakes up?" I asked. She didn't flinch. "Then he'll wake up to a loyal wife by his side. That's what matters." Appearances. I looked back at the mirror. The girl in the reflection wore elegance like armor. She had Charlotte's confidence, Charlotte's posture, but my eyes couldn't lie. They trembled with questions no one wanted answered. Outside, the chapel bells rang. I descended the stairs of the estate like a puppet pulled by duty. The hallway smelled like polished mahogany and lilies. Every guest had arrived thinking they'd witness a postponed ceremony, rescheduled at short notice to a private family chapel. They didn't know the bride was a substitute. The limousine ride was quiet. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, in my throat, in the tips of my fingers. I wasn't in love. I didn't even know Grayson beyond what his online biography said, and the scattered journal entries Charlotte had left behind. Yet a part of me ached. For him, for myself, for the man who had lost his sight, his mobility, and now his bride. What a cruel thing to lose everything and be handed someone else in her place. The chapel was small, nestled beneath hanging Spanish moss and oak trees older than memory. Candlelight flickered along the stone walls, and organ notes floated softly in the background. Sister Bernice waited at the altar with a weathered book in her hands. She gave me a look, not of judgment, but something deeper, as if she knew this wasn't a love story. Not yet. Grayson was wheeled in, eyes closed, dressed in a tailored tuxedo. A nurse adjusted his collar gently. The only movement was the steady rise and fall of his chest. Machines hidden behind velvet curtains hummed in support. I walked down the aisle, every step echoing like a drumbeat in a vast canyon. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't scared, but because if I cried, the truth would fall out and unravel everything. Nate stood near the front pew, arms folded, watching with eyes that saw more than they let on. He was Grayson's lifelong friend, appointed as his legal proxy, and he didn't trust me. Not for a second. The ceremony was short. Sister Bernice asked the questions. I gave the rehearsed answers. I placed a ring on the finger of a man who could not place one on mine. When she said, "You may now share a moment of silence together," I reached for Grayson's hand. It was warm, solid, human. And then, something happened. His thumb twitched. Barely, just once, enough for me to pause, to freeze, to wonder, did I imagine that? I glanced up. Nate's brow furrowed. The nurse checked the machines, but said nothing. I stood there, hand in his, a lie in my mouth, and something terrifyingly real in my chest. The silence ended. The guests clapped politely. Cameras flashed. Another illusion captured for the society pages. We returned to the Lowell estate that evening, the house quiet under the weight of what had just been orchestrated. Etta met us at the front door and guided me to the guest wing, the one designated as mine. I sat on the edge of the bed, the silk gown fanned out around me like spilled cream. My fingers still tingled from the moment in the chapel. Had he known? No, he couldn't have. Could he? A knock at the door again. Etta, holding a tray. "I brought your tea," she said, setting it down gently. She didn't leave immediately. Instead, she sat in the chair by the window, gazing at the darkened garden beyond. "You know," she said quietly, "I watched Miss Charlotte grow up in this house. She wore that same look you're wearing now." "What look?" "The one that asks if anyone ever really saw the real girl under all that polish." I looked down at my hands, at the diamond bracelet glinting under the lamplight. "I didn't want this," I whispered. Etta nodded. "Few women ever do, not at first. But what matters is what you do now." She stood, gave me a small nod, and left me with the tea, the silence, and the lie I had spoken with trembling hands. I looked toward the hallway, toward the room where Grayson Lowell slept, and something inside me whispered, he's not just a coma patient. He's a man with memories, with a past, with a heartbeat that recognized something, even in sleep. And I had just walked into his life, wearing someone else's name. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The Lowell estate didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum, curated by silence and money. Long corridors dressed in velvet wallpaper. Antique frames staring down from every wall, and rugs so thick they muffled, not just footsteps but thoughts. I wandered through it that night in the soft slippers Etta had left for me. Every corner whispered history. Old money, old rules, and none of it was mine. Grayson's room was at the end of the east wing. A set of French doors opened to a wide balcony that overlooked the marshlands. Spanish moss danced in the breeze beyond the glass. Inside, the space was still and immaculate, the air faintly scented with bergamot and linen. He lay there, motionless, his chest rising with quiet rhythm beneath white sheets. Machines pulsed gently in the corner, keeping their slow vigil. I hesitated at the doorway, then stepped inside. The nurse, a woman named Candace, gave me a tight smile before standing. "He's stable," she said. "Vitals are steady. No change tonight." I nodded. "Thank you." She lingered a moment, glancing between me and Grayson, then added softly, He always preferred having music at night, low volume. Classical. Do you think he can hear it? She shrugged, her voice careful. Some believe coma patients can hear everything. Others say it's wishful thinking. A pause. But I've seen the way his heart rate responds when someone talks to him. She left, leaving me alone with a man I had married but never met. I sat beside him in the wide leather chair. The lamp by the bed cast a warm glow, and his face looked carved from marble, serene, untouched by the chaos around him. He looked nothing like the photos Charlotte used to show off. The man in those images was stiff-jawed, suited, unreadable. This version of him was vulnerable. Human. I reached for the small speaker on the nightstand and pressed play. A soft piano melody filled the room. Ravel, I think. Gentle, melancholic. The kind of music that fills up empty spaces without asking permission. "Hi," I whispered, my voice barely there. "You don't know me. Not really." My fingers brushed his knuckles. No reaction. "My name is Caroline," I said, the words catching in my throat. "But everyone thinks I'm Charlotte." I swallowed. The lie echoed louder in the silence. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. But you were alone, and they said it would be temporary, that it wouldn't matter." The machine behind him beeped gently, rhythm steady, unchanged. I stood to leave, but then stopped. "I read that you liked white tea. With lemon. I'll bring some tomorrow." As I closed the door, I didn't notice the faint twitch in his left hand. The next morning I awoke to a knock at my door. Etta stood there, holding a linen-wrapped tray. "Breakfast in the sunroom," she said. "Nate would like a word." My stomach dropped. Nate Barlow wasn't like the other suits that circled around Grayson's name. He had grown up with him, worked alongside him for years, and looked at people the way a hawk watched prey. Quiet, precise. I found him standing by the tall windows, coffee in hand, wearing a dark blazer even though the Savannah heat was already climbing. "Good morning, Charlotte," he said, placing heavy emphasis on the name. I smiled tightly. "Morning," he gestured to the tray on the table. Grits, buttered toast, poached eggs, Southern comfort, dressed up for polite society. "I'm surprised you're eating." Charlotte never touched grits. My fork paused midway to my mouth. Tastes change. He sipped his coffee, watching me over the rim. "And you've changed too. You used to call me Natey. Haven't heard that once this week." I forced a small laugh. "I guess I've matured." "You guess," he echoed, setting the cup down. A long silence passed between us. Then he leaned in slightly. "I don't know who you are," he said quietly, "but I know you're not her." My pulse quickened. "Excuse me?" "Charlotte," he continued, "never visited this estate unless there was a gala or a headline. And she certainly never sat by Grayson's bedside whispering apologies in the dark." My throat went dry. "I have recordings," he added, almost casually. "The cameras in the hallway near Grayson's room pick up sound. You were talking to him last night." My hands tightened around the linen napkin. "What are you going to do?" I asked, voice low. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the window, staring out at the marsh beyond. "You said your name was Caroline." A cold rush flooded my chest. "You're not the first person in this family to live under a different name," he said. "But you might be the first to do it with kindness." That caught me off guard. He turned back to me. "He deserves someone honest. If you care about him even a little, don't let this go on forever." I nodded slowly. "I won't." He left the room without another word. Later that afternoon, I returned to Grayson's room. Candace greeted me with a surprised look. His fingers moved again, twice. Left hand. My heart skipped. I sat down beside him, cupped his hand gently. "I'm still here," I said, more to myself than to him. "But I don't know for how long." I brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "They think you're just a contract, a legacy. But when I read your journals, I saw something else. You didn't want perfection. You wanted peace." The sunlight shifted through the balcony windows, dappling across the bed. "I don't know if I'm brave enough to stay when you wake up," I whispered. "But if you ever do, I hope you'll remember me. Not the name I used. Just me." Behind me, the door creaked. I turned, expecting Candace. It was Etta. She stepped in, holding a small silver box. "I thought you should see this," she said. Inside the box were 3 letters. Handwritten, addressed to Charlotte, unopened. I looked up at her, confused. "They were returned to sender," Etta said. "Grayson sent them months before the accident." She never responded. I found them in her drawer. I opened the top letter. It read, "If you don't want this life with me, say so. But don't leave me guessing. I'd rather be alone than lied to." My fingers trembled. Etta placed a hand on my shoulder. "He already knew what it felt like to be abandoned. Don't make him feel it twice." I stayed there long after she left, watching the man I was never supposed to love, trying to memorize every breath, every pause in the music. Something was shifting, not just in him, but in me. It started with a sigh. Not mine, Grayson's, soft, barely audible. But real. I had just finished reading aloud from a book I found tucked in the corner of his library, the edges frayed from use. It wasn't anything profound, just a collection of Southern poetry. But I'd chosen it for the tone, gentle, warm, familiar. A voice that didn't try too hard to be remembered. The moment his breath shifted, I froze. My hand tightened around the page mid-turn. I glanced at his face. Still. His eyes remained closed, lips unmoving. But something about the silence that followed felt different. He wasn't lost in some unreachable space. He was closer. I leaned forward, barely breathing. "Grayson?" I whispered, uncertain if I even wanted him to respond yet. Silence. But that breath, there was something in it. Recognition. A tiny pull of air that said he wasn't as far away as everyone believed. I stayed a moment longer, then stood, placing the book gently on the table beside his bed. As I turned to leave, I heard it again. A breath. And this time it sounded almost steady. Back in my room, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was afraid he might wake up, but because I was afraid of what it would mean if he did. Would he ask for Charlotte? Would he remember what had happened before the crash? What she'd done? What I had done? The next morning, Eleanor arrived. Her perfume reached the hallway before she did. Something sharp and expensive, like gardenias mixed with command. She swept through the foyer in a cream linen suit, sunglasses perched like armor. "I heard there's been movement," she said without looking at me. "Nate told you?" She removed her glasses and pinned me with a stare. "Candace, the nurse, she's loyal. To the right people." I didn't reply. There was no point. "I need you to keep up appearances," she continued. "If the media catches wind that Charlotte, you, are not actually his wife, we lose everything. His company, the board seats, the estate alliances. It all unravels." "I never asked for any of it," I said quietly. She tilted her head. "You think Charlotte did?" My voice hardened. "She left." Eleanor stepped closer, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. She didn't leave. She chose not to be shackled. There's a difference. I stared at her, finally asking the question I'd buried since the beginning. Did you ever love him? Did Charlotte? She laughed, soft and humorless. Love? Darling, we're not in a fairy tale. Grayson was a means to survival. That family's wealth could have kept our name clean for another generation. And if you're smart, you'll stop asking about feelings and start learning how to play your part. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked. Instead, I turned away. Back in Grayson's room, the sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains, painting the walls in pale gold. I sat beside him again, this time with tea, white, no sugar, lemon on the side. I placed it gently on the nightstand, not because I expected him to reach for it, but because I needed to do something that felt real. They still think I'm Charlotte, I said softly, watching his unmoving face. But I think you know better. I reached for his hand again, holding it between mine. I read your letters, I admitted, voice trembling. The ones you sent to her. You were asking for honesty. For clarity. You deserve both, but she never gave them to you. The machine beside him beeped, unchanged. But I'm not her, I whispered. I don't know what you'd say if you opened your eyes and saw me. Maybe you'd be angry. Maybe you'd turn away, but at least I'd be telling the truth. I stayed until evening, talking about nothing and everything. My art, the way the marsh looked at dawn, a bird I saw nesting near the balcony. And then I said it. I wish I had met you under different circumstances. That night, as I walked past the library, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. Candles flickered from inside. Etta sat by the fireplace, thumbing through a photo album. "You're not sleeping either?" I asked. She smiled. "Too many memories in this house." "They don't like to stay put." I sat beside her on the rug. "Grayson used to hide love notes for his mother in these books," she said, flipping through a volume. "Little drawings, too. Always thought he'd grow up to be a writer." I smiled. Then what happened? Life? Business? Pressure. Same thing that happens to everyone in this house eventually. She turned to face me. "Except you." I met her eyes. "I'm not like them." "No," she said, "but you're still here." She closed the book, resting it in her lap. "I see the way you look at him," she said softly. "It's not pity." My voice cracked. "It's not supposed to be anything. I was just filling in." Etta touched my hand. "Sometimes the people who step in end up being the ones who stay." A log shifted in the fireplace. Sparks floated upward, glowing briefly before vanishing. I lay awake until morning, unsure of what tomorrow might bring. But for the first time since stepping into Charlotte's shoes, I didn't feel like I was sinking. I felt like I was standing on something solid, and for the first time, I hoped he would wake up. Not because I needed forgiveness, but because I wanted him to see me, the real me. Even if it meant losing everything. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. It happened just after sunset. The Lowell estate glowed in that brief hour between gold and gray, where every shadow seemed to lean a little longer, every silence a little deeper. I stood in Grayson's room, placing his tea on the left side of the tray again, just as I'd done every evening this week. Habit or hope, I couldn't say any more. The room was still. The soft jazz playing from the corner speaker filled the space like fog. I tucked the blanket over his legs, smoothing the edges, brushing invisible wrinkles. The way you do for someone you don't expect to answer, but still want to comfort. And then his fingers moved. Not a twitch this time. A slow, deliberate curl of his index finger against the sheet. I froze. My heart climbed into my throat, thudding with panic and something dangerously close to longing. "Grayson," I whispered, stepping closer. "Can you hear me?" His eyelids didn't lift. His body didn't stir. But his hand moved again, a soft press into the fabric. A sound caught in my throat. I reached for the nurse call button, but stopped short. I needed a moment, just one, before everything changed. "I'm here," I said, kneeling beside the bed, my voice trembling. "It's me." I didn't say Charlotte. I couldn't. I slid my fingers into his, gently, afraid of breaking whatever spell was holding the moment together. "I don't know if you remember what happened, or where you are. But you're safe. You're home." A long pause, and then again, his thumb brushed mine. I wanted to cry, to laugh, to run and tell someone. But instead, I just leaned in closer, forehead nearly touching his. "You're coming back, aren't you?" I whispered. "Even if it's just one piece at a time." Behind me, the door opened. I turned sharply. Nate stood there, arms crossed, brow furrowed. "What happened?" he asked. I stepped back, instinctively pulling my hand away. He moved. Twice. His hand. Nate walked forward, eyes scanning Grayson's body with clinical precision. "Did you call Candace?" "No." "Not yet, I wasn't sure." He looked at me then, not angry, not smug, just searching. "Why not?" "Because I needed this moment," I said honestly. "Before it gets taken away." He stared at me for a long time, as if seeing something he hadn't expected. "I believe you," he finally said. "Let me call Dr. Talbot. She needs to evaluate him." He left, and I turned back to Grayson. His fingers were still again. But the silence in the room had changed. It wasn't absence anymore. It was anticipation. That night, the house shifted, quietly. Like everyone could feel something stirring beneath the marble and wood. Staff moved with tighter steps. Eleanor left 2 voicemails for me. Neither returned. Etta appeared with tea I hadn't asked for, and her eyes held something I hadn't seen before, fear wrapped in hope. "He's waking up, isn't he?" she asked as she poured the tea. "I think so," I said. "Or maybe he's deciding to." She nodded slowly, placing the cup beside me. "That man's always done things on his own time." Candace returned late, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "He responded to pressure stimuli," she confirmed. "Dr. Talbot thinks he's transitioning out of the coma. It could take hours, days, maybe weeks, but it's happening." I nodded, the weight of her words sitting heavy on my chest. Later that night, I walked out onto the balcony outside his room, staring into the blue haze of dusk. The marsh stretched out beneath the moonlight, like a silver secret. And for a moment, I let myself believe that maybe everything was shifting in the right direction. But just as I closed my eyes, the door behind me creaked again. Eleanor. She walked in like she owned the walls, her heels silent, her expression unreadable. I heard. I didn't move. "Nate told you?" "He tells me what he's paid to," she said coolly. "But I have eyes, Caroline." She stepped toward the bed, her gaze locking on Grayson's face. "He'll wake up soon," she murmured. "And he'll expect to see his wife." I turned toward her. "What if he doesn't ask for her?" Eleanor smiled, but it was tight, brittle. "You think he'll choose you?" "The understudy? I'm not performing anymore." "Oh, darling," she said, brushing invisible dust from a nightstand. "You were never meant to be the lead." I walked past her, heading for the door. "You should start preparing," I said, voice calm but sharp. "Because when he does wake up, I'm not lying to him. She didn't stop me, but as I closed the door behind me, her words followed. He might forgive you, Caroline, but society won't. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the library, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the fire. I kept hearing his voice, not in reality, but in memory. In his letters, his journal entries, I don't need perfection. I need someone real. The next morning came with gold light and cool air. I made his tea again, without thinking, without hesitation. And when I entered his room, I saw it. His eyes, open. Not wide, not fully alert, but unmistakably awake. I dropped the tray. Grayson. His gaze drifted, unfocused, toward the sound of my voice. And then, his lips moved. Just one word, so quiet, I wasn't sure I heard it right. Caroline. I stepped back, hand pressed to my chest. He knew, he had known all along, and I had no idea what that meant next. His eyes were open, but they weren't looking at me. Not quite. They flicked toward the light spilling through the window, blinking, slow, unfocused. Pale blue, like the shallow edge of a lake at dawn. They shimmered, but not with recognition. More like someone stepping back into the world, one hesitant breath at a time. I stood frozen, halfway between awe and fear. My name still echoed in the room. Caroline. Soft, uneven, but unmistakable. I stepped closer, voice catching in my throat. Grayson, I whispered. Can you hear me? His lips parted again. They moved slightly, but no words came. Only a faint, hoarse exhale. I moved to the edge of the bed, my hand instinctively brushing his wrist. The moment I touched him, he flinched, just barely. But it was enough. I pulled back. My heart beat against my ribs like a warning. He knew. Not everything, not yet, but something. Candace entered seconds later, clipboard in hand. She froze when she saw him. Oh my God, she breathed. You're awake. Grayson's gaze shifted toward her voice. He blinked again, slowly. Stay with him, she said quickly. I'll page Dr. Talbot. Don't move him. Don't push him to speak yet. I nodded. My knees felt like glass. As the door clicked shut behind her, I looked down at him, unsure of what to say now that I'd waited so long to be seen. But when his eyes met mine, truly met them, it was as if the air in the room collapsed in on itself. I opened my mouth, searching for a script that didn't exist. Instead, I said, You've been asleep for almost 3 months. The plane, they said you might not. His fingers moved again, toward mine. I reached forward slowly, giving him time to retreat if he wanted. He didn't. The tips of his fingers brushed mine, just enough to say, I'm here. Before I could speak again, the door opened. Nate stepped inside, phone in one hand, concern etched across his face. He stopped cold when he saw Grayson awake, eyes open, arm moving slightly. His mouth opened, closed. Then, he's conscious? I nodded. He said something? My throat tightened. My name. Nate's expression didn't change, but his silence said everything. The rest of the day blurred in motion. Nurses, equipment, soft commands. Dr. Talbot arrived, examining him with the calm precision of someone who had learned not to get too hopeful, too fast. She smiled at him gently. Grayson, blink twice if you understand me. He blinked. Twice. You're in Savannah, she continued. You are in a coma. You're safe now. Another blink. Another exhale. She turned to me after a beat. He's emerging. He'll be groggy, confused, but we're past the worst of it. I nodded, but said nothing. My pulse was still somewhere in my throat. That night, after the room had quieted, I sat beside him again. A full moon hung over the marshlands, casting silver light across the windows. The house was still. No Eleanor. No Nate, no questions, just us. I sipped tea in silence, not sure if I should speak, not sure if he wanted me to, but then he did it again. My name, Caroline. This time it was clearer. Not smooth, but intentional. I looked at him, trembling. You knew? His lips curled. Barely, but yes. I felt like my heart cracked wide open. How long? He blinked slowly. Voice, he whispered. The word raw, broken. I covered my mouth, tears stinging the corners of my eyes. I tried to sound like her, I said, barely breathing the words. Everyone asked me to. He watched me, unblinking. Your family. The contract. Charlotte left. I never meant for it to go this far. But the more time I spent with you, the harder it became to pretend. His hand shifted, reaching. I met him halfway. I'm sorry, I whispered. For the lie. For staying in it. He was silent for a long time, then closed his eyes. Not from pain, but as if choosing his next words with care. Stayed, he finally said. A single word. But the way he said it made me forget every lie I'd told. I stayed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered the halls like a ghost in silk, stopping in front of Charlotte's old room, the one left untouched since she vanished. It still smelled faintly of her perfume. Her suitcase, untouched. Her monogrammed hairbrush on the vanity. She hadn't just run. She had left the stage, mid-act, and thrown me into the spotlight. And now, the man I was never supposed to meet knew the truth. And hadn't let go. I turned around to find Nate standing in the hall, arms crossed. You told him, he said. I shook my head. I didn't have to. He stepped closer. If you think that man's going to let this go easily, he already did, I said, interrupting. He saw me, not Charlotte, and he didn't pull away. Nate studied me carefully. That doesn't mean the rest of the world will forgive it. I'm not asking the world to forgive me, I replied. Only him. The two of us stood in silence, shadows stretching between us. And then he surprised me. Do you love him? The question knocked the air from my chest. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not yet. Because love shouldn't be born from deception, but something deeper had begun, something that looked a lot like truth. I stayed, I said again quietly, and not because they told me to. He looked at me a moment longer, then nodded once. Then tell him that, he said, before someone else does. The rain came in soft sheets that morning, whispering against the windows like secrets being passed between the sky and the earth. The kind of rain that made the world slow down, hush and listen. I stood just inside Grayson's room, watching the grey light settle over his features. His color had returned, his movements more deliberate now. The lines of his face were no longer masked in stillness. He was waking, not just physically, but emotionally. Moment by moment. Caroline, he said, his voice clearer today, though still low. I looked up, startled. He hadn't said anything yet this morning. Yes? I asked, stepping closer. He turned his head slowly on the pillow, eyes following the direction of my voice. Did she ever love me? The question felt like a stone dropped into still water. Charlotte. Even now, in the quiet aftermath of everything, she still hung over us like perfume on an old coat, lingering, unavoidable. I don't know, I said honestly. She said yes to the marriage, but I don't think she said yes to you. He looked away then, toward the window, his jaw tightening slightly. She was beautiful, he murmured. The kind of beauty that makes people stop talking, I nodded. And you wanted someone who'd listen instead. That made him smile, faintly. You're not her, he said. You never tried to be, even when you wore her name. I walked to the edge of his bed and sat gently in the chair. I tried to play her, I admitted, at first, for my mother. For the illusion. But the more I learned about you, the less I wanted to act. He turned his head back toward me. Then why didn't you leave? I breathed in slowly. Because I started to care. Quietly. Completely. And that scared me more than being caught. He didn't respond right away. Just stared at me. Fully. Deliberately. Then he said, "Thank you. For staying. Even when it wasn't yours to carry." My eyes stung with a warmth I hadn't expected. I stood, brushing my hands together nervously. I'll bring you some of that tea again, I said. Lemon on the left, no sugar. He chuckled softly. I remember. As I stepped into the hallway, I nearly collided with Etta, who held a tray of folded laundry in her arms. You've been in there a long time, she said, raising a brow. I smiled faintly. He's talking more. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. You should know. Miss Charlotte called. The air shifted. She's coming back. My heart stopped. When? Tomorrow, or the day after. My chest tightened. Does he know? Etta shook her head. Not yet, but he will. Best you tell him before someone else does. I nodded, stepping back into the room where the light had grown warmer. But I didn't say anything yet. I couldn't, not until I was ready. Later that afternoon, Nate found me in the garden. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and I was kneeling beside the lavender bed, wiping dirt from my palms. She's booked a flight, he said, not bothering with small talk. She wants her name back. I stood slowly, brushing the wet soil from my skirt. She gave it up the moment she left, I replied. This wasn't a game, it was a life. Nate looked tired. Not angry, just weathered. She thinks Grayson's shares are still in her name, he said. She doesn't know about the amendment he filed before the crash. What amendment? He filed to split ownership. 50% to her, 50% to whoever signed the marriage license. My mouth parted, stunned. But that's me. Nate nodded. Which means when Charlotte comes back, it's not just love on the line, it's legacy. She's not just coming for him. She's coming for everything. My heart pounded. That night, I sat with Grayson again, this time in silence. The jazz station played a low tune in the background. He sipped his tea slowly, his movement steadier now, though still tender. She's coming back, I said, not looking at him. His hands stilled. I thought she might, he replied. She wants her place. He nodded once. And do you? I turned to him. I never wanted her place. I wanted mine. I just didn't know what that looked like until you opened your eyes. He stared at me for a long time, then reached for my hand, clasping it gently. You gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost, he said. Time, stillness, a reason to wake up. My voice cracked. Even after the lie? His grip tightened, especially because of what you did after. Outside, the rain began again, softer this time, as if the sky too was holding its breath. And for the first time in weeks, I exhaled, not with fear, but with fragile, honest hope. The envelope was sealed in blue wax, I found it in the drawer of Grayson's desk, tucked beneath invoices, old receipts, and a faded photograph of him and a woman who looked far too much like Charlotte to be a stranger. The letter was addressed simply, "To be opened only if I don't wake up." I stared at it for a long time, the wax catching the light like a warning. My hand hovered above it, heart pounding. This wasn't mine to read. But I had already crossed that line long ago, hadn't I? When I finally broke the seal, the crack of the wax sounded too loud in the stillness of the library. The letter was handwritten, the ink slightly smudged in the corners. I read slowly. If this letter finds its way to someone else's hands, then I guess the worst happened. I just want to say, I knew. About the doubt, about the way Charlotte wouldn't meet my eyes the last few weeks, about the way she handed off calls. I knew I wasn't speaking to her anymore. My throat tightened. But the woman I was speaking to, she listened. She laughed in the right places. She remembered things Charlotte never bothered to ask. She asked about my hands, if they ached. She paused when I was tired. She placed the tea on the left. I swallowed hard, the room tilting gently beneath me. If you're still around, whoever you are, thank you for seeing me, even when I wasn't looking back. My hands trembled as I folded the letter. I held it against my chest, eyes burning. He'd known. Even before the coma, even when the world still thought everything was perfect, Grayson had sensed the difference. The truth hadn't just woken him. It had anchored him. I slipped the letter back into the drawer, just as the library door creaked open. Nate stood in the threshold, watching me. "You found it?" he said. "You knew it was there." He nodded. He asked me to put it in there before the wedding. Said if he didn't wake up, someone would need to know he wasn't blind to everything. I looked down. He wasn't. Nate stepped into the room, his footsteps quiet on the rug. He asked me for one other thing. I glanced up. To cancel the press conference Charlotte had planned after the wedding, said he didn't want his marriage to start with a camera flash. That doesn't sound like something Charlotte would have liked. He smiled faintly. Exactly. He moved to the shelves, brushing dust from a row of books. He's always been that way, quiet about the things that mattered most. But when he finally decides something, you won't move him. I leaned against the desk. "And what about you, Nate? Where do you stand?" He turned, hands in his pockets. "I stand where he does. And right now, he's standing with you." I let the words sink in. They felt heavier than I expected. Later that evening, I returned to Grayson's room. He was sitting upright now, pillows behind him, the tray of half-eaten food beside him like evidence of the progress no one thought possible just days ago. He looked at me, eyes alert. "You were gone a while." I smiled. "I found something." His brows lifted slightly. "Oh?" I sat beside him and reached for his hand. "The letter." "In the drawer." He didn't pretend not to know. "You read it?" I nodded. "I shouldn't have." He squeezed my fingers. "But I'm glad you did." I exhaled, shaky. "You knew, even before the wedding." "I heard the difference," he said. "In the way you listened. In the pauses. Charlotte never asked me about the scar on my left wrist. You did." I brushed my thumb along his knuckles. "I kept waiting for you to call me out. I was waiting for you to stop hiding." His voice was gentle, but it pulled something out of me I'd been burying for weeks. "I didn't want you to wake up hating me," I whispered. He didn't answer right away. "I didn't," he said finally. "I woke up hoping you'd still be here." The words sank into my chest like roots. Not lightning. Not fireworks. but something deeper, real. A knock on the door startled us both. Candace peeked in. "Sorry to interrupt." "But there's someone at the gate." Grayson looked to me. "Charlotte," I said. The name settled in the room like fog. Candace nodded. "She's asking for a meeting, says it's urgent." Grayson glanced down at our hands, still gently clasped. "Let her wait," he said softly. "For the first time, we're writing our own chapter." I turned to him, eyes wide. "You're sure?" He looked at me with a calm I hadn't seen since he woke. "I'm done living on someone else's terms." His thumb brushed mine again. "I chose you long before I knew your name. And this time, I didn't need to hide my tears." She arrived with a suitcase in one hand and sunglasses shielding her eyes, even though the sky had turned silver and quiet above the estate. Charlotte Ashford never knocked. She swept into places like she belonged in them, like she was the gravity pulling every room into her orbit, and the Lowell estate had once been designed with her in mind. Every marble tile, every crystal light fixture, every manicured garden, all a stage for her rise. But the moment she stepped through the front door, the air shifted. I stood at the top of the stairs, still, watching. She looked up. "Well," she said, lips curling into a polite smile that never quite reached her eyes. "It's been a while, Caroline." I descended the staircase slowly, hand trailing along the banister, grounding myself. "You're early," I said. "You sound surprised. I thought you might not come at all." "I wasn't going to," she replied, removing her sunglasses. "But then I heard my husband woke up." I flinched. Charlotte saw it and smiled wider. We stood face to face in the grand foyer, two women carrying the same last name, wearing the same shade of lipstick, and yet separated by years of invisible lines. Blood, expectation, resentment. "I assume you've made yourself at home," she said, glancing at the fresh flowers on the entry table, the faint music drifting from the parlor. "This wasn't supposed to be permanent," I said carefully, "but you stayed anyway." I met her gaze. "He asked me to." She tilted her head. "You've always been good at filling space, quietly, no spotlight. No applause, just slipping in. I didn't ask to replace you, Charlotte. You walked away." "I left a situation that wasn't mine to be in," she snapped, her voice suddenly sharper. "I didn't love him, and I wasn't going to fake it." I paused. "Then why come back?" Her silence was loud. Before she could answer, Nate stepped in from the library. "Charlotte," he said, nodding once. She turned, her mask sliding back into place. "Nate, still brooding and loyal, I see. And you're still calculating," he said without malice. Just truth. Charlotte's eyes narrowed. "Is Grayson awake?" "He is." She waited. When no invitation followed, she asked, "Will you take me to him?" Nate looked at me. I took a breath. "Let me talk to him first." Charlotte's expression barely flickered, but I saw the tension in her jaw. She set her suitcase down with a faint thud. "I'll be waiting," she said, walking toward the drawing room as if the walls still knew her touch. I found Grayson sitting upright in bed, sunlight pooling across the comforter. His hands rested on the open pages of a journal, though I wasn't sure if he'd been reading or remembering. "She's here," I said. He didn't look up. "I heard the car. She wants to see you." He closed the journal. "Do you?" I stepped closer, voice soft. "I don't want to be the one to stop anything, but I don't want to disappear again." He looked up at me then. Fully, gently. "You're not the one who disappears," he said. "You're the one who stays." His words didn't fix everything, but they steadied me. "I can be in the room," I offered, "or wait outside." He thought for a moment. "Stay," When we entered the parlor, Charlotte rose from the antique love seat like she'd been waiting to deliver a performance. She looked at him, and for a moment, her expression softened. "You look better than I expected." Grayson leaned into his cane, his first day upright, and gave her a small nod. "And you look exactly the same. Still charming," she said. Then she turned to me. "And she still follows you like a shadow." Grayson sat carefully in the chair opposite her. "She's not my shadow. She's my choice." The air between us snapped. Charlotte blinked. "You knew?" "I did." "And you still—" "I knew before the accident," he interrupted. "Before the wedding. Before the name on the license meant anything." Her voice dropped. "Then why didn't you stop it?" "Because you already had." She said nothing. The mask slipped a little. I saw it. Regret, maybe. Or jealousy. Not of the love, but of the certainty. "You left," Grayson said, quieter now. "I don't fault you for it, but you don't get to come back and claim something you discarded." Charlotte's voice wavered just barely. "I didn't think you'd wake up." "I did," he replied. "And the first voice I wanted to hear wasn't yours." It landed softly. She stood, brushing invisible dust from her blouse. "So what now?" "You live happily ever after with my sister in the life that was supposed to be mine?" Grayson didn't answer. He just looked at me. "I never tried to take your life," I said. "I only started living it when you gave it away." Charlotte picked up her suitcase and walked to the door. She paused, hand resting on the handle. "You always wanted to be seen, Caroline," she said without turning. "Well, now you are. Let's see what you do with it." And then she left. The door clicked shut behind her, quieter than I expected. Grayson exhaled. "She didn't come for me." "No," I said. "She came for the story." He turned to me, tired but steady. "And what do you want?" I looked at him, no hesitation. "Not a story," I whispered. "Just the truth. And a chance to live it." Grayson reached for my hand, and this time, I didn't flinch. The days after Charlotte's visit unfolded with a strange stillness, like the hush that follows a storm. Not peace, not yet, but the fragile quiet of something unfinished. The estate returned to its rhythm. Morning tea, nurse visits, soft music floating through the hallways, and Grayson's voice, now stronger, asking questions I wasn't always ready to answer. He was healing faster than expected. Each day he took more steps, sometimes with a cane, sometimes just with my hand guiding his. But the real recovery was in his voice, in the way he stopped hesitating before saying my name. "Caroline." Every time he said it, something inside me steadied. This morning, he asked to go outside. "Just the garden," he said, already pushing himself upright. "I want to feel something real." I helped him down the steps, careful with every movement. His hand gripped my arm, not hard, just enough for balance. The cane tapped softly against the stones as we reached the garden path where late summer blooms leaned in toward the sun. We stopped by the fountain. The water shimmered, gentle and rhythmic, like a breath the earth had remembered to take. Grayson sat on the bench beneath the pergola, eyes closed, face turned toward the light. "I used to come out here early," he said. "Before meetings. Before the noise. This place was the only silence I trusted." I sat beside him. "It still feels that way." He nodded, then opened his eyes slowly. "She meant to come back for the shares." It wasn't a question. "No one said it aloud," I replied. "But yes, that was the plan." He looked at me. "And you?" My stomach fluttered. "I didn't stay for what you had, Grayson." "Then why did you?" I hesitated, then answered honestly. Because for the first time in my life I wasn't performing. I wasn't the girl in the background, I was just seen. And even when you couldn't speak, I felt it. He turned his head toward me. Funny, he said. I was thinking the same thing. A pause settled between us. Then he added, "That letter you found. I wrote it 2 days before the crash. I never told Charlotte. I already knew I wouldn't marry her." My breath caught. "But you still let the wedding happen." "I was planning to stop it. I had an envelope ready, one for the board, one for my attorney. But then I woke up to your voice. And you didn't say anything." "Because for the first time," he said quietly, "I didn't want to run." My eyes stung. I looked down at our hands, his now resting gently atop mine. "I don't know what this is," I whispered, "or what it's supposed to become." He reached for my chin, lifting it gently. "I do." The words landed like gravity, but just as I leaned in, the creak of a window above us snapped the moment. Eleanor's silhouette appeared on the second-floor balcony. She wasn't watching the garden. She was watching us. Grayson followed my gaze. "Has she said anything since Charlotte left?" "No," I said, "but she's been quiet. And when my mother is quiet, she's planning." We returned inside as the sky darkened, clouds rolling in slow and low. The scent of rain lingered in the air, but it didn't fall, it just waited. In the hallway, Etta met us with 2 letters in her hand. "One came for you," she said to Grayson, "from your attorney, the others from Charlotte." Grayson opened the first letter at the breakfast table. His expression barely shifted as he read. "It's official," he said. "The amendment I filed, the one splitting the company shares, it went through. Caroline, half the board legally recognizes you as my spouse." I blinked. "Even after everything?" "It was filed under emergency circumstances. And," he added with a glance, "they knew something wasn't right with Charlotte long before this." He opened the second envelope slower. Charlotte's handwriting was still impeccable. He read silently for a moment, then passed it to me. I hesitated before taking it. "Grayson, I never thought you'd wake up, and when you did, I didn't expect you to remember the difference, but you did. You always did. I didn't leave because I hated you. I left because I knew I'd never be enough. Not in the way you needed, not in the way that quiet girl in the corner seemed to understand. Give her the life I could never give you. I hope for once you get something real. See." I folded the letter slowly. "She left it at the hotel," Grayson said. "Didn't even ask for a car to the airport. I think she knew the story was over," I said softly. "No," he replied. "I think she finally let go of pretending." The storm arrived that night. A warm, humming storm, wind in the shutters, thunder soft like drums rolling through the hills. We sat in the library, lights low, the fire casting amber light across the walls. Grayson leaned against the couch pillows, his legs stretched out, eyes half closed. "I want to show you something tomorrow," he said. "What is it?" "A place. Near the lake. I used to go there before the crash." "What's there?" "A bench," he said, "and maybe something we haven't named yet." I smiled, unsure if it was hope or fear tightening in my chest. But I knew one thing. He wasn't looking through me anymore. He was looking at me. And he wasn't seeing Charlotte. The morning came with golden light and the scent of jasmine drifting in through the open windows. A soft wind moved through the sheer curtains, carrying with it the faint rustle of leaves and the promise of something different, something quieter than before, but heavier, too. Grayson was already dressed when I entered the sunroom, Not in the soft loungewear the nurses laid out for him, but in real clothes, dark slacks, a button-down shirt, his grandfather's old watch buckled at his wrist. The cane was by his side, but he wasn't leaning on it. He stood straighter than I'd ever seen him since the accident. "Ready?" he asked, his voice low but sure. I nodded. "Where are we going?" He offered me his hand. "To remember something, and maybe to forget something else." We drove in silence, the car winding through oak-lined roads outside Savannah. Spanish moss trailed from the trees like silk threads, swaying over gravel paths that hadn't been touched in years. Grayson gave me directions quietly, pointing once or twice with a gesture. We turned off the main road, down a path where the trees grew denser, the light more dappled. "This place belonged to my grandmother," he said. "She kept it hidden, like a secret. Never told the press, never listed it under the family trust. It was hers. And for a little while, it was mine." We pulled up to a clearing. A small wooden dock stretched over the edge of a glass-still lake. Just beyond it, under a canopy of ancient trees, sat a weathered bench with faded carvings on the arms. A stone path curved to it, wildflowers growing between the cracks. "She called it her escape," he added. "When the parties got too loud, when the world started demanding more than she could give." I followed him down the path slowly, careful of his pace. We reached the bench and sat side by side, the water before us, calm as breath. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I brought Charlotte here once. She said it was too quiet, too far from anything important. And what do you think?" He smiled faintly. "I think it's the first place I stopped pretending." I turned toward him, feeling the pull of everything we hadn't yet said. "You're not angry?" I asked. "That I didn't tell you the truth sooner?" He didn't look at me. His eyes stayed on the lake. "No," he said. "I think if I had known right away, I wouldn't have listened the same way. I would have been trying to fix something instead of feeling it." I swallowed hard. "I was terrified the whole time." "So was I," he replied softly. "Terrified that the version of you I heard in the coma was better than what I'd wake up to." His words hit something raw in me. "But you weren't," he said, turning to meet my eyes. "You were real. And you stayed." The silence that followed felt full, not empty. The wind picked up, brushing leaves across the path, and somewhere in the distance, a bird called once, then again, before going quiet. Grayson reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote this a week before the wedding," he said. "Didn't show anyone. I was planning to read it during our vows." He handed it to me. I opened it slowly. The handwriting was his, slightly uneven in places, but unmistakably sincere. "I don't want the kind of love that sparkles. I want the kind that stays. The kind that shows up even when the door isn't locked, even when the lights are out. I want love with a memory, one that doesn't forget when things get quiet, when they get hard, when they get too real to decorate. If you're standing beside me today, it's because you chose me, not just the life I offer. And I promise to spend every day earning that." My vision blurred as I folded the paper. "You wrote this for her," I whispered. "I wrote it for whoever showed up," he said. "And you did." My fingers tightened around the letter. "Grayson, I don't know how to be what everyone else expects from you. I'm not polished. I don't come with a legacy. I don't even know what tomorrow looks like." He leaned in closer, his forehead almost touching mine. "I don't want tomorrow to look like a press release," he said. "I want it to look like this. A lake. A letter. A woman who told the truth even when it hurt." Tears slipped down my cheeks. I didn't bother hiding them this time. He cupped my face gently. "I don't want perfect," he whispered. "I want real. And I want you." His lips touched mine, softly, like a secret being shared for the first time. And just like that, everything quieted. Not because the story was over, but because it was finally beginning. It should have been a perfect morning. The lake still shimmered with the memory of yesterday's kiss. The house smelled of cinnamon rolls and fresh coffee, and Grayson had started his day without the cane, his strength quietly returning like the tide. But perfection, I was learning, never stayed long in places where truth had only recently arrived. By midday, a man in a gray suit showed up at the front door. His shoes didn't make a sound on the marble floor. His eyes didn't blink enough. He asked for Grayson by name and handed Nate an envelope with the kind of weight that didn't come from paper. Grayson opened it in the study while I stood by the window, pretending to admire the garden, my stomach already in knots. "It's from the board," he said, voice tight. "They've called an emergency meeting this afternoon." I turned, frowning. "Why?" "They're requesting a vote to reassess company control." He looked up. "Charlotte's filed a petition." My pulse kicked. But she left. She also submitted evidence claiming she was coerced into giving up her rights, by me, and by you. The words hit like a splash of cold water. That's not true. She's claiming the coma impaired my judgment. That I didn't know who I was marrying. That the documents were signed under false pretenses. I stepped forward. "Grayson, this was never about the company." "No. But it's always been about power. And Charlotte doesn't lose quietly." I stared at him. "What do we do?" He stood, slowly, no cane. "We show up." The board meeting was held downtown, in a glass building that reflected the clouds and made everything feel just a little too exposed. Grayson walked in beside me, his hand lightly resting on my lower back, steadying both of us. Inside the conference room, the air was cold, sterile. 12 board members, a few legal aides, and one empty seat at the head of the table. Until Charlotte walked in. She was dressed in navy silk, hair pulled back, lips calm, but eyes sharp. She didn't look at me, not once. The meeting began with formalities. The lawyer read through the claims. Grayson's medical file was referenced, the marriage documents reviewed, his prior amendment to split ownership acknowledged. Then Charlotte stood. "I don't want to drag this out," she began, voice smooth. "Grayson was in a coma when these decisions were made. He wasn't capable of informed consent." Grayson cut in, his voice calm but firm. "That's a lie. The amendment was filed a week before the accident." "Under duress," she said. "I have texts, emails, evidence of manipulation." "From her." She pointed to me. The room shifted. Eyes landed on me. I swallowed hard. "I didn't ask for any of this." "But you stayed," Charlotte said. "You used my name, wore my ring, signed the marriage license. And then you took my seat." "I stayed because you left," I said, voice breaking. "Because you gave him up. Not just the marriage, but the person." "And I wasn't pretending to love him." "I do." Charlotte laughed quietly. "You fell in love during a lie." "That's not love. That's a fantasy." Grayson stepped forward. "You don't get to define this anymore, Charlotte." His voice rang across the room, silencing every whisper. "I was going to call off the wedding before the crash," he said. "I had a statement ready. You knew it was over." She didn't flinch. "But you ran, and Caroline stayed. She cared for me." "She didn't ask for my money. She didn't even ask to be seen." but I saw her. He looked at the board. You want to vote? Fine, vote. But understand this. This isn't about legal rights. It's about who shows up when it matters, and who disappears. A heavy silence followed. Charlotte stepped back, her expression unreadable. The board conferred behind closed doors for 15 minutes. It felt like 15 years. When they returned, the chair cleared her throat. After reviewing all submitted evidence and statements, the board has voted to uphold the current ownership structure. My breath caught. Charlotte didn't argue. She didn't speak. She simply nodded once and walked out. Later, as we rode the elevator down, I turned to Grayson. You just gave up any chance at going back to normal. He met my eyes. Good. We reached the ground floor, stepped into the warm savannah air. He took my hand, fingers firm around mine. We turned the page today, he said softly. But what if she comes back again? Then we keep turning. And this time, we write the story ourselves. The days that followed felt like something suspended between endings and beginnings. Grayson and I moved through the estate as if we were learning it all over again. Each room, each corridor, redefined not by who had once occupied it, but by who remained. Fall had arrived in Savannah. The air was cooler now, soft with the scent of turning leaves and something almost bittersweet. A change was coming. You could feel it in the bones of the house. That afternoon, Grayson called a meeting, not with lawyers, not with board members, but with the staff. It was just after lunch. Etta stood at the far end of the room, arms crossed but eyes soft. Candace lingered by the window. Nate, quiet as ever, leaned against the archway, his gaze flicking toward me once, before returning to Grayson. He stood at the head of the parlor, no cane, no hesitation. "I've asked you here," he began, "because this home is not the same. And it shouldn't be. What it was built on wasn't entirely honest. And what it's become, what we're becoming, can't survive unless we're honest now." He looked at each of them, then finally at me. I was a man asleep in more ways than one, not just in that hospital bed, but long before. I thought success meant control. I thought legacy meant never admitting you were wrong. He paused, and then I met someone who taught me that truth doesn't have to be loud. It just has to stay. The room held still. "I've updated the estate trust," he continued. "Everyone in this house has a place in it now. Not just in title, in voice. If we're going to move forward, we do it together." Candace gasped softly. Etta's chin lifted just slightly. Nate said nothing, but I saw it in his posture. A letting go. After they left the room, Grayson turned to me. "You changed this place without trying to." "I didn't mean to change anything," I said quietly. "I just couldn't pretend anymore. And I couldn't keep pretending you were temporary." He reached for my hand. "I want to rebuild this house," he said. "Not just the walls, the meaning. I want it to feel like something more than memory." I looked around. The house had been beautiful once. It still was, but it carried weight in its beauty, like it had always been waiting for someone to breathe new life into it. "What do you have in mind?" "I want to open it," he said. "To more than just business dinners and charity galas. I want to create a retreat for people recovering from something hard. Illness, grief, loss, a place for stillness." My eyes widened. "You mean, like a sanctuary?" "Yes," he said, his voice softening. "We call it Stillhouse." I turned the word over in my mind. It felt right, honest. "Whole." "I'd like to help," I said, "if you'll let me." He smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair from my cheek. You already are. That evening, as we walked through the back gardens, we came across an old fountain half covered in ivy. The stone was chipped, the basin dry. I ran my hand along the edge, tracing initials someone had carved long ago. Stillhouse could start here, I said. We don't need to build something new. Just bring back what was forgotten. He looked at the fountain, then at me. Just like us. We sat on the old garden bench, the sun dipping low behind the trees. The quiet was warm, filled with the hum of crickets and the faint rustle of the wind through magnolia leaves. I leaned into him, head on his shoulder. Do you think it's really over? I asked. The part where we were pretending? He tilted his head toward mine. I think the pretending ended the moment I saw you, he whispered. Not as Charlotte, not as a stand-in, just you. Tears welled in my eyes, not from sadness, but from relief. We sat in silence for a long while. Then softly I said, I kept the name, you know, on the marriage license. I didn't change it back. He didn't answer at first. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a velvet box. My breath hitched. I know this isn't how most stories begin, he said, opening it slowly to reveal a ring so simple, so quietly elegant, it looked like it belonged to someone who loved long walks and honest words more than applause. But I don't want most stories. I want ours. From the beginning this time. No secrets, no stand-ins. Just truth. I stared at the ring, blinking back tears. Yes, I whispered. Yes. 1,000 times, yes. And beneath the fading light, among ivy and broken stone, we promised each other the one thing we'd both been denied for far too long. A life that was real, and a love that stayed. It started with a letter. Not one delivered by hand or courier. No knock on the door. Just a white envelope slid beneath the front gate, rain-speckled, with Caroline written in cursive across the front. I found it early in the morning, before Grayson had woken. The sky was still pale, the house wrapped in that fragile kind of hush that only came before the world truly opened its eyes. I turned the envelope over in my hands, heart pulsing louder than I wanted to admit. It was from Charlotte. No return address. No unnecessary words. I watched the board meeting. I saw how he looked at you. I don't have to like it. But I understand it now. For what it's worth. Thank you for being braver than I was. There was no apology. No bitterness. Just those 3 lines. Honest. Clean. Final. I folded it slowly, slid it into the drawer of the hallway console, and exhaled like I hadn't in weeks. Downstairs, Grayson was stirring cream into his coffee, dressed in soft cotton and barefoot on the hardwood. His hair was still wet from a shower, and he hummed something under his breath, a tune I didn't recognize, but one that made the kitchen feel warm. He looked up and smiled when he saw me. You're up early. There was a letter, I said. His brows lifted. From Charlotte. He set the spoon down and crossed the room toward me. You okay? I nodded, though the truth trembled just beneath the surface. It was kinder than I expected. Sometimes letting go is the final act of love, he said gently. I let the words settle. Let them fill the room and all the quiet spaces between us. Then I whispered, I think it's really over. He took my hand. Then we begin. The next few weeks passed in motion. The renovation plans for Stillhouse started to take shape. Grayson threw himself into the blueprints, collaborating with a local architect and a group of trauma counselors to reimagine the east wing of the estate into quiet, reflective spaces. Rooms with soft lighting, wraparound porches, reading corners, walking paths lined with lavender and rosemary. I handled the art therapy side, designing studios with skylights, planning workshops that would blend memory with creativity. For the first time in years, I felt purpose humming beneath my skin, but with progress came new tensions. One afternoon, I walked into the library and found Nate seated alone, flipping through one of Grayson's ledgers. "You're not on payroll anymore," I teased. He looked up, not smiling. "I'm not here for the books," he said. "I'm here because I'm still not sure I trust this." I stopped. "Still?" He set the ledger down. "You're good for him, Caroline. I can see that now. But this house, this dream, it's built on land that's known too many ghosts. It takes more than love to keep it from sinking." I stepped closer, voice steady. "I'm not going to let him drown in it." Nate stood slowly. "Neither am I." We looked at each other then, not as rivals, not even as skeptics. Just two people who cared for the same man in different ways. That unspoken acknowledgement passed between us like a silent contract. "I'm not here to haunt the past," I said softly. "I'm here to make sure it has a future." Later that evening, Grayson and I sat on the back terrace, the stars soft overhead. He poured us both glasses of wine, the sound of it delicate and rhythmic. "I talked to the architect today," he said. "She's incorporating your idea, an open gallery with rotating art from the patients. That was Etta's idea, actually." I smiled. "She said everyone deserves to see themselves on the wall." He took a sip, then looked at me. "Do you ever think about leaving it all behind?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "But only when I forget what we're doing here matters." He turned toward me fully. "I think about it too," he said. "What it would have looked like if I hadn't woken up. If none of this had happened." I reached for his hand, and I realized I would have missed the best part. The air shifted, just slightly, but enough to make me lean into him, forehead against his shoulder, heart pressed to something steady. Stillhouse wasn't finished. The estate still bore its scars, and I knew not everyone would understand our story. But for the first time in my life, I didn't need them to. We weren't trying to erase the past. We were building something that honored it and dared to grow anyway. The first snowfall in Savannah was a rare, almost impossible thing. But that morning, thin flakes drifted from a gray sky, melting on the warm earth before they had a chance to settle. Grayson stood by the window, mug in hand, watching it with a boyish awe that made something tighten in my chest. "Stillhouse is almost ready," he said without turning. "They're painting the last wing today. The sign goes up next week." I walked over, wrapping my arms around him from behind, my cheek against his back. "You should be proud." "I am," he said softly. "But that's not what's on my mind." He turned then, setting the mug aside, his hands finding mine. "There's something unfinished between us, Caroline." The air shifted. "I know," I said. "It's not doubt," he added. "It's just, I've never wanted to give someone everything this badly." My throat tightened. "You already have," I whispered. He searched my face, eyes deep and steady. "I want you to meet someone." Before I could ask, he added, "Her name's Miriam. She raised my mother after my grandfather passed. She was more of a mother to me than anyone. She lives upstate now, on the edge of the mountains. I'd love to meet her," I said. He smiled, but there was hesitation in it. "She's sharp, kind, but not easily fooled. If I tell her you're the one I chose, she'll believe me. But if she sees even a shadow of doubt in your eyes, she'll call it. That night, we packed light. Etta sent us off with warm scones wrapped in foil, and Nate insisted on checking the tires twice before we pulled away. The drive north was long, quiet, and achingly beautiful. The trees grew bare the farther we went, their branches etched black against the pale sky. We talked about little things, what kind of workshop Stillhouse would offer first, whether we should repaint the West Wing library, what to do with the old piano no one touched anymore. But beneath every word was that nervous flutter, because this meeting mattered. We arrived just before sunset. Miriam's house was tucked into a grove of pine, the chimney releasing soft curls of smoke into the evening air. She stepped out before we knocked. Tall, graceful, wrapped in a burgundy shawl, her silver hair braided neatly. Her eyes landed on Grayson, and in that moment, he was a boy again. "Miri," he breathed. She opened her arms. He went straight into them. When they finally parted, she turned to me. "And this," she said, voice warm but assessing, "must be the woman who saved you." I smiled, unsure of what to say. "He saved me too," she nodded, a flicker of approval crossing her face. "We'll see." Inside, her home was all dark wood and old books, the scent of clove and cedar in the air. We sat by the fire while she brewed tea in an iron kettle. "So," she said once we were settled, "tell me your story." I glanced at Grayson, but he said nothing. Just gave me a quiet nod, so I told her. All of it. Not the polished version, the real one. How I stepped into a role that wasn't mine. How I lied. How I stayed. How I fell in love with the silence first, then with the man who filled it. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't decorate the truth. When I finished, she looked at me for a long moment, then turned to Grayson. "She's braver than your mother ever was," she said. He let out a slow breath. "I know." Miriam reached for my hand, her fingers cool but strong. "I raised your mother to be someone the world wouldn't swallow. But she passed that armor down to you, Grayson, and it nearly cost you everything." Then she smiled. "But this woman, she didn't bring armor. She brought light." Tears gathered in my eyes. I squeezed her hand. We stayed the night in the guest room, listening to wind move through the trees, wrapped in quilts, and the comfort of being seen. At dawn, as we prepared to leave, Miriam walked us to the porch. She handed Grayson a small wooden box. "Your grandfather's compass," she said. "He used it when he didn't trust the stars." Grayson opened it slowly, then looked at me. "I don't need it anymore," he said. And just before we got into the car, Miriam pulled me aside. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything. Don't let him forget where he found you." I nodded, eyes stinging. "I won't." As we drove away, Grayson reached for my hand again, fingers warm. "Sure. You didn't just pass the test," he said. "You mean with Miriam?" He smiled. "No, with me." And for the first time, it felt like the future wasn't something we had to fight for. It was something already waiting, just ahead. The grand opening of Stillhouse fell on a morning brushed with sunlight and promise. Everything had come together, barely. There were fresh coats of paint still drying in the far hallway, wildflowers hurriedly arranged in mason jars across the reception desk, and the faint scent of lemon oil lingering where Etta had polished the wooden floors to a glow. But it was ready. In its imperfect, worn-in way, it was ready. Guests began to arrive just after 10. Survivors, caregivers, writers, veterans, people with invisible hurts and quiet hopes. They came slowly, some alone, others with soft-spoken companions, all of them drawn by something they couldn't quite name. Grayson stood by the front doors in a navy blazer and open collar, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a small boutonniere pinned just above his heart. He looked nothing like the man I'd first met on paper. No walls, no curated charm, just presence. "You nervous?" I asked, fixing a stray thread on his cuff. "Terrified," he whispered, in the best possible way. We moved through the halls together, greeting guests, explaining spaces. The sensory room with adjustable lighting. The library where people could write letters they never intended to send. The studio filled with soft pastels and blank canvases, and one quote etched into the wall. "Healing begins where truth is allowed to speak." Around noon, the music began, gentle strings echoing through the atrium. Chairs had been set up beneath the covered veranda. That's where Grayson was supposed to speak. But when the time came, he hesitated. "I don't think I want to talk about what we built," he said, turning to me. "I think I want to talk about you." I blinked. "Grayson, let me." So he stepped forward, the sun streaking through the pergola above, casting shadows across his shoulders as he stood before the people who had come not just for the place, but for the story. "I was a man, asleep in more ways than one," he began. "And when I woke up, I found myself in a life I didn't recognize. But somehow, it was the first one that felt real." His eyes found mine. "She came into my world by accident. But she stayed by choice. And that choice became everything." You could feel the stillness in the air, the kind where no one dares to move in case they miss the next breath. "She wasn't trying to save me," he continued. "She just saw me. And in a world where so much is built on pretending, she told the truth, even when it broke her." My throat tightened. "And now," he said softly, "we're building something for others like us. People who need quiet more than advice. Who need to be heard before they're healed." He paused, then smiled. "Stillhouse isn't just a place. It's a promise. That no matter where you've been or what you've survived, there's a space for you to begin again." The crowd stood. Some clapped, others cried. But all of them felt something shift in the silence that followed. Later, after the guests had wandered into quiet rooms and sunlit paths, Grayson pulled me aside, leading me to the garden we'd nearly forgotten. The fountain stood restored now, water trickling down its sides, ivy trimmed back, initials still carved into the edge. He knelt beside it, brushing dust from the stone. "I didn't want to ask you this until the house had its heart back," he said, standing slowly. "But now that it does, I can't wait." He turned to me, reaching into his pocket, and this time the box wasn't velvet. It was carved wood, simple, honest. "I don't want a wedding," he said. "I want a vow, just the two of us. In the place we brought back to life." I opened the box. Inside was a ring made of gold and rosewood, inlaid with a tiny compass star. "To remind us," he said softly, "of where we started and where we're going." Tears blurred my vision. "Yes," I whispered. And right there, beneath the branches, beside the water, with no guests and no fanfare, we promised each other again, this time without pretense or secrets or masks. That night, I found a new letter in the top drawer of my nightstand. It wasn't signed, but I knew the handwriting. "You gave him a different ending, one I never had the courage to write. Thank you." I folded it carefully and placed it beside the one I had found months ago. A pair of truths, a beginning and an end. Grayson came in then, curling into the bed beside me, one arm wrapping around my waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, lips brushing my temple. I stared at the ceiling. "That I never meant to belong here." He smiled into my hair. "That's the thing about belonging. It's never about what you planned. It's about where you stay." I turned into him, letting the quiet settle. And as sleep crept in, I held on to one final truth. The greatest love stories aren't the ones that start with a spark. They're the ones that survive the fire and decide to stay anyway. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought matters to me either way.